guys, welcome back. So let's continue from where we left off last time, which is looking at what the international and national bodies are responsible for with regards to radiation protection. More specifically, we'll be focusing on the International Atomic Energy Agency's basic safety standards and what can be found in those standards regarding these things you see in front of you. So both the IAEA and the American Association of Physicists for Medicine, both of these organizations define what the manager is supposed to be doing really well. And what is the manager's responsibilities? Well, the management is required to approve and sign the application for a license. They are supposed to be involved in license amendment or license renewal. And in doing so, they acknowledge their commitment and their responsibilities towards radiation protection. It is also the manager's responsibility to appoint a RSO or a radiation safety officer, and this radiation safety officer has to agree to be responsible for implementing a radiation protection program. Also, the RSO has to be given sufficient authority and the time and the resources and managing rights to communicate with staff as necessary regarding any radiation safety rules and regulations. The manager has to ensure that the RSO has the education and the training and the experience required by the regulatory body in the country. So, for example, here in Qatar, looking at CNAQ for an example, CNAQ management has to ensure that the RSO has the necessary training and has met the requirements of the Ministry of Municipality and Environment and is enforcing and implementing the laws here, which is Qatar Law 31. Managers also have to allocate or provide funding for any resources needed to meet any radiation safety requirements and standards. So how about the licensee's responsibilities? And you may be wondering, who is this licensee that they're talking about? So a licensee is basically the radiation safety officer, because that person is ultimately responsible for the radiation safety and for the conduct of all licensed activities at a facility. Once again, we'll be looking at CNAQ as an example. So at CNAQ, what does the licensee or RSO have to do? The RSO has to ensure for all workers that occupational exposure is limited and optimized as much as is possible. Also, the RSO has to ensure that suitable and adequate facilities, equipment, and services are provided, and that appropriate protective devices and monitoring equipment are provided and properly used. For example, the TLD badges given to you to use to monitor your exposure. These have to be working properly and monitored regularly. Also, appropriate training is provided on a periodic basis and updated on a periodic basis. And this is also the responsibility of the RSO or the licensee. Adequate records have to be maintained, and a safety culture in the use of radiation protection has to be promoted at the college. So how about the worker, which is you and I? What are our responsibilities? So we have to follow any applicable rules for radiation protection, and we have to use our monitoring devices and protective equipment and clothing. We have to use them correctly or properly, and we have to cooperate with the licensee with respect to any protection guidelines. Conditions of service on the right here, this is also included underneath the worker's responsibilities. For example, one of the things that they define is the conditions for young persons or those persons that are in training, like yourselves, the student. It basically says that no person under the age of 16 shall be subjected to any kind of occupational exposure. So if you're below that age, you aren't allowed to work in the radiation field. No persons under the age of 18 shall be allowed to work in a controlled area unless they are supervised by an appropriate person. And this we'll delve into a little bit more in the next slide. An example of your professional responsibilities, though, as a student, is the care of your TLD badge. As you know, TLD badges should never be taken off-site when you are scheduled for labs at the college. So it should always be staying on-site on your TLD badge rack. The TLD badges must be returned every 3 months for reading and processing. And if those TLD badges are not returned on time, let's say you are doing clinical work terms, you will not be allowed to return to the clinical until you have a new badge. And this sometimes can take a couple of months. So it's important that you know how to care for your TLD badge, where to store it, and when to return it. So what does the IAEA Basic Safety Standards say about classifying radiation areas? Now, they say an area should be assessed for radiation safety before it can be used. The area or the X-ray department is evaluated for shielding and integrity, and the RSO, together with the Occupational Health and Safety Department representative, they are the ones usually to determine whether an area will be maintained as a controlled or a public area. Now, a controlled area is delineated or restricted by physical means. So when the area is classified as controlled, a display or a warning symbol, which is recommended by an international or a local organization, this should usually be displayed at the entryway of the radiation department or the demarcated area. Access to these areas, to the classified areas, will be restricted also by administrative procedures. And by that I mean anybody that's working in the area should have a license to work there. Engineering controls and physical barriers will also be enforced. And this could mean automatic locks to the door or a key card access that restricts any entry into the area. So how about occupational exposure? Well, the employers, the radiation safety officer, and the workers, yourselves, we all are responsible for ensuring procedures and regulations that limit occupational exposure. We have to ensure protection and safety for everyone and include an investigation level or a procedure in the event that any dose limit regarding occupational exposure is exceeded. We have to make the local rules known to workers and to other persons within the area, and we have to ensure that any work is adequately supervised. These local rules should include procedures for wearing and handling and storing personal dosimeters and any actions to minimize radiation exposure during incidents or unusual events. So what is the bond call for action? The bond call for action is also listed on the CMRT website and is listed as one of the things that we all have to abide by in terms of radiation safety. Now, the bond call for action seeks to address issues arising in radiation protection in medicine. And the bond call for action was issued at an IAEA organized international conference. And this was held in Bonn, Germany in 2012, which is where it got its name from. Now, the Bonn Call for Action put out a joint statement supported by the IAEA and the World Health Organization, and this addresses the specific outcome of prioritizing radiation protection in medicine. The Bonn Call for Action has highlighted justification as the first position statement because it is considering this most likely as the most important to safeguard patients against adverse health effects of ionizing radiation. So the point they are making upfront is to always work towards more good than harm. And here you have the 10 actions listed by the Bonn Call for Action put out by the International Atomic Energy Agency. So we'll go through them briefly and I'll try and give you an example of each one. So number one, we've already mentioned, which is basically the principles of justification and ensuring that that's enforced. And that is doing more good than harm to the patient. Number two, enhancing the optimization of protection and safety. An example of that would be establishing a quality assurance program. And how about strengthening the manufacturer's role in contributing to overall safety? Number three. Well, the manufacturer could improve safety of their medical devices or their X-ray machines and equipment by enhancing the radiation protection features in the design of both the physical equipment and the software to make it easier for us to use. Or perhaps they could make default features available rather than optional extra features to optimize the exposure settings. For example, you know how we have organ programs that we can pre-select? Well, we can pre-select these based on the patient size and based on the type of examination. So there's less chance of errors occurring and repeat exposures occurring. And on to number four, strengthening the radiation protection education and training of health professionals. Well, we have to pay particular attention to the training of healthcare professionals in situations where we implement new technology. That could be a good example. And then how about shaping and promoting a strategic research agenda for radiation protection in medicine? Number 5. Well, we can promote research to improve methods for organ dose assessment. This is one of the examples they use in the Bonn Call for Action document. Number 6, increase availability of improved global information on medical exposures and occupational exposures in medicine. Well, we can do this by improving our collection of dose data and the trends on medical and occupational exposures globally. Number 7, we have to improve prevention of medical radiation incidents and accidents. How can we do this? Well, we can implement prospective risk analysis methods to enhance safety in clinical practice. Number 8 asks us to strengthen our radiation safety culture in healthcare. We can do this by enhancing information exchange amongst our peers on radiation protection and safety-related issues. We can do this through conferences or through radiation safety refresher courses and so forth. Number 9 asks us to foster an improved radiation benefit risk dialogue. Well, how can we do this? We can increase awareness about radiation benefits and risks among healthcare professionals and among patients and the public. And number 10, last but not least, asks us to strengthen the implementation of safety requirements globally. And we can do this by developing practical guidelines on how to implement the international basic safety standards in healthcare globally. So how about ethical considerations that impact radiation protection? Are there any? Well, yes, of course there is. And you've learned about most or all of these in the patient care course. So this is more like a review. But let's look at this closely. Beneficence, non-maleficence, autonomy, and justice. Now we know advancements in radiation equipment have created an environment in which the use of medical imaging for diagnosis and treatment continues to increase. And students and radiographers must be more diligent, more so than ever, in selecting radiation exposure techniques to maintain that as low as reasonably achievable motto that we have. Radiographic imaging is a major contributor to a patient's radiation exposure. So we have to ensure that when we are delivering exposures, that we also are being ethically considerate. And let's look at these terms. The term beneficence. This refers to a proposed imaging procedure helping the patient, or at least not causing harm to the patient. In the achievement of good, however, people may be subjected to the opposite, which is harm. So let me put this in perspective for you. Let's use an example. So let's look at chemotherapy. Chemotherapy may achieve its goal of curing cancer through the use of radiation, but it can also cause pain and nausea and hair loss. So the individuals and society therefore need to determine the amount of harm that may be tolerated. Non-maleficence requires that the imaging professional does not harm the patient and that the desired outcome, which is hopefully a benefit, far outweighs the risk of the procedure. So this is closely linked to risk versus benefit. As medical professionals, we should always be thinking about what are the goals of the imaging procedure? Is the dose of radiation we will be giving the patient absolutely necessary? And is the exam the only and the best way to obtain a diagnosis? And then lastly, justice, or the principle of fairness. This requires the performance of a procedure only after informed consent has been granted. Informed consent, as you know, is the permission, usually in writing, given by a patient agreeing to a procedure. And we would normally use informed consent for high-risk procedures in X-ray. So in conclusion, we should always be using guidelines like the IAEA basic safety standards when working with radiation. We should be maintaining our current knowledge of safety standards, and we should be intervening in circumstances of unethical or unsafe practice. So these are the references for this presentation, and I'll see you soon in the next lecture. Bye for now.